The mountains do not care about your experience level. They do not care about your high-end gear or the many years you have spent tracking elk through the thickets. The crazy mountains in Montana are a jagged wall of limestone and ego. They sit there like a row of broken teeth waiting to bite down on anyone foolish enough to think they are in control. Aaron Hedges was 38 years old, and he was not a fool. He was a hunter. He was a man who knew the weight of a rifle and the rhythm of the trail. But in September of 2014, the mountain decided that Aaron Hedges belonged to the dirt. It is a story that defies logic and mocks our understanding of human endurance. Aaron was out with two friends near the Sunlight Lake area. They were seasoned men, and they had a plan. He was supposed to head to a supply cache to grab some extra gear while his partners stayed behind. It was a simple task. A routine hike that should have taken him a few hours at most. But the mountains have a way of stretching time and warping distance. When Aaron did not return, his friends did not panic immediately. They assumed he had hunkered down or taken a different route. By the time they realized the silence was permanent, the sun had already slipped behind the peaks, and the temperature was dropping into the red. The search that followed was one of the most intensive in the history of the region. Dozens of professionals and volunteers poured into the Crazies. They brought in helicopters with thermal imaging cameras that could spot a field mouse from 1,000 feet up. They brought in K9 units trained to catch the scent of a human being even through the biting wind. They found nothing. No footprints in the soft mud. No broken branches. No spent shell casings. It was as if Aaron Hedges had simply evaporated into the thin, cold air. The mountain was a blank slate, and it refused to give up its secrets. One of the searchers mentioned the feeling of being watched, not by a predator like a cougar or a bear, but by something older and more patient. There is a specific kind of silence in the crazy mountains that feels heavy. It presses against your eardrums until you start to hear things that are not there. A voice calling your name just over the next ridge. The sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel when you are standing perfectly still. The local tribes avoided these peaks for centuries for a reason. They called them the Mountains of the Visions, but they also knew they were a place where the mind could fracture. Then the first piece of the puzzle appeared, and it made absolutely no sense. Searchers found Aaron's boots. They were miles away from where he was last seen. They were sitting out in the open in an area that had already been searched multiple times. They were not scuffed or torn. They were just sitting there as if he had carefully unlaced them and stepped out of them before continuing his journey into the wilderness. Think about that for a second. Imagine the sheer agony of walking over volcanic rock and frozen scree in your bare feet. Why would a rational man remove his only protection against the elements? There is a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing that happens in the final stages of hypothermia. The brain misfires, and the victim feels a sudden rush of heat, causing them to strip off their clothes even as they are freezing to death. But that usually happens near the body. Aaron's boots were found miles from anything else. And then they found his backpack. It was also miles away in a different direction. His water bottle was full. His gear was intact. The movement pattern required to drop these items in these specific locations was physically impossible for a man on foot in that time frame. It was as if he were being moved by something that did not care about the laws of physics. The investigators were baffled. They looked at the maps and tried to trace a logical path, but the dots would not connect. To get from the point of disappearance to the location of the boots, Aaron would have had to cross vertical rock faces and navigate through dense, tangled brush that would have stripped the skin from his bones. He would have had to do this in the pitch black of night without a flashlight. Even an elite mountain climber with full gear would struggle to make that trek. Aaron was a hunter in his late 30s, and he was supposedly barefoot for part of it. The math of the tragedy simply did not add up. A year passed. Then another. The case grew cold and the files were tucked away in metal cabinets. The family was left in a state of perpetual mourning, caught in the limbo between hope and the crushing reality of the void. Then, in 2016, a land surveyor was working on the opposite side of the mountain range. He stumbled upon something white and bleached in the grass. It was a skull. Then he found the rest of the remains. Aaron Hedges had finally been found, but his discovery only deepened the nightmare. He was found on a private ranch on the northern edge of the mountains. The location where his remains were discovered was over 15 miles from his last known position. To get there, he would have had to climb over the crest of the entire mountain range. We are talking about an elevation gain of thousands of feet, followed by a descent through some of the most rugged terrain in the lower 48 states. He was found near a barbed wire fence within sight of a farmhouse. He was so close to salvation. He could have seen the lights of that house in the distance. He could have heard the sound of cattle, but he stopped. He lay down in the grass and he let the mountain take the rest of him. When they examined the remains, they found more anomalies. His clothing was missing in patches. His gear was scattered in a way that suggested he had been wandering in circles or perhaps being led. There were no signs of animal predation on the bones, which is nearly unheard of in a wilderness teeming with scavengers. It was as if the coyotes and the crows refused to touch him. The investigators could not determine a cause of death. The official report said exposure, but that is a catch-all term for when the system does not want to admit it has no idea what happened. The cynical part of me wants to say he just got lost, that he panicked and the mountains did the rest. But I have seen too many of these cases to believe in simple accidents anymore. There is a microscopic level of detail in these disappearances that suggests a predator or a force that we are not equipped to understand. The way the items are placed, the impossible distances covered in short periods of time, the silence of the dogs, it all points to a predatory intelligence that operates on the periphery of our vision. Aaron Hedges was a strong man, but strength is a liability when you are dealing with something that can bend the environment to its will. I think about Aaron in those final hours. I think about him looking at the lights of that farmhouse and being unable to move another inch. Was he stopped by a physical barrier, or was it something in his mind? Did he see something out there in the dark that made him realize that escape was an illusion? The Crazy Mountains earned their name not because of the people who live near them, but because of what they do to the people who enter them. The rocks are old, and they have a long memory. They remember when we were not the masters of the earth, and they seem intent on reminding us of that fact every chance they get. The mystery of Aaron Hedges remains a jagged scar on the map of Montana. It is a reminder that the wild is not a park, and it is not a playground. It is a vast and hungry machine that occasionally snags a human being in its gears and grinds them into nothingness. We look for patterns because we want to feel safe. We want to believe that if we just carry a beacon or stay on the trail, we will be fine. But the trail did not save Aaron. His gear did not save him. His experience did not save him. He was chosen by the mountain, and the mountain does not give refunds. This pattern of impossible movement and discarded footwear is not unique to the Crazies. You see it in the case of Keith Reinhard, who disappeared in Silver Plume, Colorado in 1988. He walked into the mountains and was never seen again, leaving behind a series of cryptic writings that suggested he knew something was coming for him. You see it in the disappearance of Jaryd Atadero in the Rocky Mountain National Park, where his tiny garments were found years later on a high ledge that a 3-year-old boy could never have reached on his own. These are not isolated incidents. They are chapters in a book that we are still trying to learn how to read. As the sun sets over the jagged peaks and the shadows stretch out like long dark fingers, it is easy to feel small. It is easy to realize that we are just guests here, and very unwelcome ones at that. Aaron Hedges is gone, and the mountain remains silent and indifferent. All we have left are the questions and the cold feeling in the pit of our stomachs when we look at the empty spaces on the map. Watch your step. Stay close to the light. Because out there in the high country the rules are different, and the dark is always hungry. The air in the Crazy Mountains does not move like the air in the valleys. It has a weight to it. A density that feels like it is trying to occupy the same space as the marrow in your bones. People talk about the wilderness as if it is a neutral backdrop for our adventures. They think of it as a stage where we play out our little dramas of survival and conquest. But when you spend enough time looking into the empty spaces where people used to be, you realize the stage is alive. It has a pulse that beats much slower than ours and a hunger that is never quite satisfied. Aaron Hedges was not a man who was easily frightened by the woods. He was 47 years old and built like a mountain himself. He knew the jagged terrain of Montana like the back of his own hand. Yet, in September of 2014, the mountains decided that his knowledge was an insult they were no longer willing to tolerate. The mountains do not care about your experience or your expensive Gore-Tex shell. They do not care about the $3,000 bow you carry or the years of training you put into your physical fitness. When the clouds roll over those peaks, they bring a kind of darkness that swallows light. It is a thick ink that stains everything it touches. On September 7th, Aaron set out with his friends for a week of hunting near Sunlight Lake. He was carrying a heavy pack filled with the tools of a man who intended to survive. But something shifted in the atmosphere that afternoon. A decision was made in the quiet places between the trees. Aaron told his friends he was going to take a different route to the camp because his pack was too heavy. It was a simple choice. A logical choice. It was the last rational thing he would ever do. Think about the physical reality of a man walking alone in the high country. You can hear the rhythmic crunch of dry pine needles under heavy soles. You can feel the sweat cooling on the back of your neck as the sun begins to dip behind the granite teeth of the horizon. Aaron was supposed to meet his friends at the cache. He never arrived. For days, the mountain remained silent. No campfire smoke. No whistle. No crack of a rifle. When the search finally began, it was as if he had stepped off the edge of the world. The search and rescue teams moved through the brush with a frantic energy that the mountains seemed to find amusing. They used dogs and helicopters and infrared cameras. They looked for the bright colors of a hunter, but all they found was the gray indifference of the stone. The first clue appeared in a place that defied all logic. It was a cache of gear found miles away from where Aaron was last seen. His bow was leaning against a tree, as if he had just stepped away for a moment to relieve himself. His pack was there too, sitting in the dirt. But these items were found in an area that Aaron should never have been in. To get there, he would have had to cross terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. He would have had to move with a speed and a directness that is not humanly possible for a man carrying 40 pounds of gear. There were no tracks leading to the spot. No broken branches. No signs of a struggle. Just the tools of his life left behind like offerings at a shrine to something we cannot see. Then they found the boots. This is the detail that keeps me awake when the house is quiet and the wind is rattling the window frames. They found his boots miles from the pack in an entirely different drainage. One boot was tucked neatly under a tree. The other was nearby. They were empty. A man in the high country of Montana does not take off his boots in the middle of a cold snap unless he has lost his mind or unless something has demanded them from him. Imagine the feeling of those thin socks against the frozen earth. Imagine the jagged edges of the volcanic rock tearing at the fabric, and then the skin. There was no blood on the socks. There were no signs that he had been dragging his feet. He was walking. He was moving towards something with a purpose that defies the basic instinct for self-preservation. I have spent years looking at maps of these disappearances, and the distances involved always break the scales of probability. Aaron Hedges moved across those mountains like a ghost. He crossed ridges that were choked with snow and ice. He navigated through thickets of mountain mahogany that act like barbed wire. And he did it all without his boots. Without his pack. Without his water. The official reports will talk about paradoxical undressing, or the confusion brought on by hypothermia. They want to put a label on it so they can file it away in a drawer and sleep at night. They want to believe that the brain just short-circuits and tells the body to freeze. But hypothermia does not explain how a man travels miles across broken terrain in his stocking feet without leaving a single drop of blood or a shred of clothing behind. There is an intelligence that operates on the periphery of our vision. It is a presence that stays just behind the next ridge, or just inside the shadow of a cave. Aaron Hedges was a strong man, but strength is a liability when you are dealing with something that can bend the environment to its will. I think about Aaron in those final hours. I think about him looking at the lights of that farmhouse and being unable to move another inch. He was found years later, only a short distance from a ranch house. He could see the porch lights. He could probably smell the wood smoke from the chimney. He was so close to safety that he could have thrown a stone and hit the roof. But he stayed in the trees. He sat down against a trunk, and he let the mountain take the rest of him. Was he stopped by a physical barrier, or was it something in his mind? Did he see something out there in the dark that made him realize that escape was an illusion? The crazy mountains earned their name not because of the people who live near them, but because of what they do to the people who enter them. The rocks are old, and they have a long memory. They remember when we were not the masters of the earth, and they seem intent on reminding us of that fact every chance they get. The mystery of Aaron Hedges remains a jagged scar on the map of Montana. It is a reminder that the wild is not a park, and it is not a playground. It is a vast and hungry machine that occasionally snags a human being in its gears and grinds them into nothingness. We look for patterns because we want to feel safe. We want to believe that if we just carry a beacon or stay on the trail, we will be fine. But the trail did not save Aaron. His gear did not save him. His experience did not save him. He was chosen by the mountain, and the mountain does not give refunds. This pattern of impossible movement and discarded footwear is not unique to the Crazies. You see it in the high deserts and the deep swamps. You see it in the places where the veil between what we know and what we fear is worn thin. When the searchers found his remains in 2016, they were in a spot that had been searched multiple times before. He was not there during the initial search. Then suddenly the remains were scattered. That is what the coroner says when they do not want to describe the reality of a body that has been disassembled by the elements and the scavengers. But there is a specific kind of scattering that happens in these cases. It is not the messy work of a grizzly or a cougar. It is a calculated displacement. The skull is found here. The femur is found half a mile away. The clothes are missing or turned inside out. It is as if something was taking him apart to see how he worked. To see what made a human being tick before discarding the pieces like unwanted scraps from a table. The silence that follows these discoveries is the loudest sound in the world. Aaron Hedges is a name on a list that is growing longer every year. It is a list of people who went into the woods with a plan and came out as a cautionary tale. We tell ourselves that we are at the top of the food chain because we have satellites and cell phones. But those things rely on a world of logic and physics that does not always apply in the high country. There are pockets of this planet where the rules are different, where time does not flow in a straight line, and where the distance between 2 points is not a matter of miles, but a matter of intent. Aaron stepped into one of those pockets, and the door closed behind him. He spent his final days wandering a landscape that looked familiar, but functioned like a nightmare. This pattern of impossible movement and discarded footwear is not unique to the Crazies. You see it in the case of Keith Reinhard, who disappeared in Silver Plume, Colorado in 1988. He was a journalist and a dreamer who became obsessed with the disappearance of another man named Tom Young. Young had vanished in the same area a year earlier. Keith walked into the mountains following the same path, and he was never seen again. He left behind a series of cryptic writings on his computer that suggested he knew something was coming for him. He wrote about the mountains calling to him. He wrote about the silver mines that honeycombed the earth beneath his feet like a cancer. When they found Tom Young's body, it was at the top of a ridge with a gunshot wound to the head, but the physical evidence did not match the official story of suicide. You see the same impossibility in the disappearance of Jaryd Atadero in the Rocky Mountain National Park. In 1999, a 3-year-old boy vanished while walking just a few feet ahead of a group of adults. For 4 years there was nothing. Then his tiny garments were found years later on a high ledge thousands of feet above the trail. It was a location that a 3-year-old boy could never have reached on his own. His fleece jacket was found turned inside out. His shoes were there, but his feet were gone. The pants were missing. The physics of the situation suggest that the boy was transported by something that does not care about the limitations of human climbing or the logistics of a search party. These are not isolated incidents. They are chapters in a book that we are still trying to learn how to read. We see the same markers over and over. The proximity to water. The sudden weather shifts. The missing clothing. The remains found in areas that were previously cleared by professionals. It is a language of predatory intent that we are too arrogant to translate. We want to call it a series of accidents because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. We want to believe that the woods are just trees and dirt. But Aaron Hedges and Keith Reinhard and Jaryd Atadero tell a different story. They tell a story of a world that is not ours. As the sun sets over the jagged peaks and the shadows stretch out like long dark fingers, it is easy to feel small. It is easy to realize that we are just guests here, and very unwelcome ones at that. The wind picks up and it carries the scent of old snow and wet stone. It sounds like a low vibration that you feel in your teeth more than you hear in your ears. Aaron Hedges is gone, and the mountain remains silent and indifferent. It does not offer apologies. It does not offer explanations. It simply waits for the next person who thinks they know the way home. The map is full of holes, and those holes are human-shaped. All we have left are the questions and the cold feeling in the pit of our stomachs when we look at the empty spaces on the map. We can carry our radios and our beacons and our heavy packs, but they are just charms against a storm that does not recognize our authority. The mountain is a vast and hungry machine, and it is always running. It does not need to hunt us. It just needs to wait for us to make one wrong turn. One simple decision to take the easier path. One moment of looking the wrong way. And then the gears turn and the person you were is replaced by a mystery that will never be solved. Watch your step. Stay close to the light. Because out there in the high country the rules are different, and the dark is always hungry. The trees are watching, and the rocks have a memory that spans eons. They remember the names of the ones who did not come back even if we choose to forget them. They remember the sound of a man walking in his socks across the frozen earth. They remember the look in his eyes when he saw the farmhouse lights and realized they were 1,000,000 miles away. Do not trust the silence of the woods. It is the silence of a predator that has already won. Stay on the trail and do not look back because something might be looking at you.